My name is Miguel Barrios. I received my Ph.D. from the University of Georgia, where I researched microbiology and poultry nutrition. Today, I'm the business development manager for monogastrics in the US at Jefo. I'll be answering some questions on coccidiosis. Welcome to Livestock Community. What is coccidiosis and why is it a concern in poultry farming? Coccidiosis is found anywhere where poultry is raised. So we see it across all different regions in the world, and it's a disease that costs billions of dollars to producers, whether it is a subclinical type of challenge or we actually have a disease causing coccidiosis challenge. Coccidiosis is caused by a parasite called Eimeria, and there are three main species that affect poultry: Eimeria cerevisiana, Eimeria maxima, and Eimeria tenella. Those parasites, depending on different circumstances, whether it's the diet or other disease challenges, may result in a subclinical type of disease challenge or up to a clinical disease causing and high mortality type of disease. How do coccidiostats work to combat coccidiosis in poultry? Coccidiostats work by inhibiting the growth and reproduction of Eimeria in the gastrointestinal tract. They can help to control the disease. Of course, there are different kinds of coccidiostats, whether it's chemical coccidiostats or ionophores, and some people even include phytochemicals into this category. What are the key factors to consider when determining the dosage for coccidiostats for poultry? Some of the factors to take into consideration are the severity of the coccidiosis that's usually found in that farm or maybe even in that region. Also, the age of the bird, how long are we going to grow that bird until processing, and then what type of anti-coccidial do we want to use, whether it's a chemical or an ionophore, will make a difference in the dosages of all these products. What are some common misconceptions about the use of coccidiostats in poultry farming? One complication, if you will, that we see in the field is some producers like to stick to a product when it works. So they've had a high coccidiosis challenge in the past, they have one product that they've had good results with, and they want to stick with that product for a long time. Inevitably, what we end up getting is resistance to that product. And the problem is not only for the immediate future, but also long term. Some research has shown that even after you rest the product, after you stop using the product, you will see maintained resistance. And so we need to make sure that we rotate these products accordingly. What are the potential risks associated with the misuse or overuse of anti-coccidials in poultry farming? The overuse is one of the greatest concerns that we have because we're running out of these products. And getting new products, new anti-coccidials approved is very, very expensive, and it takes a long time. So we only have a handful of these ionophores and chemicals. So therefore, the responsible use of these products is really important in order to avoid those resistant strains and then losing those medications over time. Are there any alternative treatments or preventive measures for coccidiosis besides anti-coccidials? Yeah. One of the big ones that the US industry has been using for a couple of years is coccidiosis vaccines. It's a product that takes a lot of management behind it and has to be used appropriately. But when vaccines work really well, they can make a huge impact into the production system for a company. Beyond that, it's always important to keep in mind biosecurity and the different good management practices to make sure that we maintain that challenge as low as possible. How do coccidiostats compare to other alternatives in terms of efficacy, safety, and cost? Chemical coccidiostats and ionophores have some variability in their efficacy depending on the type of Eimeria that we have a challenge with, and depending on even seasonality as compared to a vaccine. So a cocci vaccine as compared to in-feed treatments is more affordable, but you have to manage a vaccine accordingly, and that's where you have to balance some of that. Managing the vaccine with your live production team and all the things that go behind that to support that, as compared to just having an in-feed ingredient that is guaranteed, you have in your feed, you know it will be delivered to the animal, but you also have to manage to a different degree. So all those things you have to take into consideration with your team and your production type to see what is going to work best. What are some ongoing research efforts in the field of coccidiosis management and anti-coccidial efficacy? Some of the research that we see in the different conferences today is on alternative or natural ways to control coccidiosis through the feed. And some of those alternatives are phytogenics and probiotics and organic acids, and how to combine those in order to control coccidiosis without resorting back to chemical anti-coccidials or ionophores. There's also research into vaccine with some of these coccidiosis vaccine with some of these alternative products to make sure that we're not using too much of a vaccine challenge in order to develop immunity in the chicken. How do environmental factors such as temperature and humidity influence the prevalence of coccidiosis in poultry farming? Some of the environmental factors that we have to keep in mind are humidity and temperature. Especially humidity in the litter can have a detrimental effect in a flock that has a coccidiosis challenge. With high humidity comes more proliferation of diarrhea and those oocysts, which are then ingested by the chicken and then resulting in disease. So if we can control humidity in the house, in the litter, and increase ventilation, which then reduces humidity, we can help the conditions in the house to make sure that our disease challenge remains as low as possible. What are the key challenges in ensuring the proper use of anti-coccidials in poultry farming? Some of the challenges when we come to in-feed anti-coccidials have to do with the type of anti-coccidial use, whether it's chemicals or ionophores, the dosage of those chemicals depending on the challenge, and also depending on the field strains that are found in that farm and in that region. We need to make sure that those chemicals or ionophores are rotated to ensure that they work long-term. On the other hand, if you're using a coccidial vaccine, then you have to make sure that that vaccine is administered correctly. The vaccine needs to be stored appropriately at the hatchery. It needs to be mixed correctly at the hatchery. It needs to be sprayed on the birds correctly. Lastly, once on farm, those chicks need to be ingesting those oocysts at the farm to make sure that we are able to develop a good immunity. What role do regulations play in governing the use of anti-coccidial programs in poultry farming? Some of the regulations for these in-feed chemicals and ionophores depend on the type of production system that the company is using. For example, we have no antibiotics ever, raised without antibiotics, no antibiotics in human health, only the responsible use of antibiotics, and the last is conventional. So depending on which program the company raising chickens chooses to follow, there will be regulations to what part of the production system can use the ionophore or chemical, whether it's the breeders or the broilers or both. So those are the kinds of regulations that the veterinarian will have to follow in order to make sure that they're protected by the government regulations. How do you see the future of coccidiosis management evolving in poultry farming, considering factors such as antimicrobial resistance and consumer preferences for antibiotic-free products? I think the poultry is going to continue to look for more sustainable approaches to production. One of the big alternatives and good tools that we have is coccidiosis vaccine. We have about 50% of poultry production using a cocci vaccine today. All things point that 100% of the industry will try to get there. It's an affordable technology, and beyond that is one that has a better perception by the consumer than using chemical anti-coccidials and ionophores, which the consumer typically sees as an antibiotic already. So if we can go ahead and replace these in-feed type of products with a vaccine, we're going to be following what the consumer wants to do already. What advice would you give to poultry farmers regarding the responsible use of coccidiostats? I would encourage them to work really closely with their veterinarian, their nutritionist, who also is the one formulating the diets with coccidiostat, which is typically picked by the veterinarian. But understanding how these products work and assuring that we're using them responsibly for the long term is going to be really important to ensure that those in-feed coccidiostats are a tool available were there to be a need for them in the future. Are there any potential interactions between coccidiosis vaccine and other medications or supplements commonly used in poultry farming? Yes, some of the concerns that we could have is if you're using a cocci vaccine today, then you are also using alternative products in your feed, whether it be probiotics, organic acids, prebiotics. Those types of products could have a negative impact on the cocci vaccine, not allowing birds to develop an immunity. And if they don't, then that cocci vaccine is going to be rendered ineffective. So you need to make sure that the veterinarian and nutritionists are aligned in these programs to make sure that they're not hurting each other. We have a question from a livestock community member. What are some potential strategies for reducing the reliance on medications like coccidiostats in poultry farming? One go-to strategy today is coccidiosis vaccination. It's an affordable tool, and as long as we're managing that vaccine appropriately, it will be successful methodology. Beyond that, ensuring good management practices, good biosecurity to maintain that disease challenge level low, and then beyond that, working on improving the immune system of that bird through additives can also be another strategy to make sure that we have a holistic approach into the production and the raising of that bird. What are the main challenges in diagnosing coccidiosis in poultry, and how can they be overcome? So as far as diagnostics, we are using a tool today that was developed in 1970 by Johnson and Reed that has been the gold standard for lesion scoring. In the genetics, as far as the bird that we know today and the coccidiosis that we see today, surely has evolved in those almost 50, 60 years. So we need to redo some of that work and renew some of these methodologies that were developed early on and adapt them to the bird as we know it today. How are coccidiosis programs typically managed in the United States? Most often, producers in the US are running what we call a bioshuttle program, and that is a coccidiosis vaccine alongside chemical anti-coccidial or a natural phytogenic additive. And so the phytogenic is used to make sure that the coccidiosis strain in the vaccine does not grow sort of too much at once. We want to tame that Eimeria curve so it doesn't result in a disease, therefore impacting growth performance. Something else to keep in mind with these type of programs in the US, we can conduct anti-coccidial sensitivity tests, which would tell the producer which anti-coccidial works best under the coccidiosis challenge that they see. And so that would allow them to choose the right anti-coccidial in their bioshuttle program to make sure that it's as effective as possible. How does a bioshuttle program work? Bioshuttle programs are going to depend on the bird size that we are raising. They're typically ideally used in birds that are grown for at least 6 weeks or longer. In the US, we run up to 9 weeks for those bigger birds, and that allows the bird to have some of that recovery gain that we can see in the latter part of the growth. So we typically include a cocci vaccine with an anti-coccidial chemical or a phytogenic product, and then beyond that, it's going to vary on the seasonality. So warmer months, there are certain types of chemicals that will be used to make sure that they don't worsen heat stress. And in the winter months, we'll choose certain chemicals to make sure the bioshuttle program remains as effective as it did during the warmer months. That was it for me today. I hope I've answered all your questions. Thank you for watching Livestock Community.
Thanks for watching this episode of the Livestock Community Podcast, proudly sponsored by Jefo. We hope you enjoyed the discussion and found it valuable. For more information, be sure to visit jefo.com livestock community, and don't forget to follow us on YouTube and Instagram to stay updated with the latest episodes and content. We'd love to have our experts answer your questions, so feel free to send them our way through our social media. See you next time, and thank you for being part of the livestock community.